thought I had one.
Busy enough that I have to just consider that in my real life as opposed to, you know.
Meeting to order. And this is actually a special concurrent Housing and Redevelopment Authority together with the Richfield City Council and Planning Commission members work session. I'll ask for the roll call.
Chair Sandal.
Here.
Member Quam. Here. Rubenstein.
Here.
Gotel. And Mr. Gepner will be arriving late. And for the City Council, Councilmember Elliott. Here. Councilmember Fitzhenry.
Here.
Councilmember Sandal.
Here.
Mayor Gotel.
Here.
And Councilmember Rogi will not be here tonight. And planning commissioners are... Thank you.
Okay. All right, first item is the discussion regarding the rental housing inventory and needs assessment. And we have our friend from before, if you'd care to join us up at the mic. And Mr. Stark, would you care to let the audience know what we're talking about?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Sandal. In December of last year, the HRA directed staff to hire Stantec to conduct a rental housing study. The HRA approved the scope of services that went along with that study. Last month in April, the Jay Dema from Stantec did present to the same body their findings. There were a number of questions and comments that came out of that meeting, and we had asked Mr. Dema to address those questions that were within the scope of his study, and then to come back tonight with a revised study and willing to answer any follow-up questions you might have. There was a city council memo that went out. It was council memo number 60 and HRA memo number 27 that did go through some of the changes that were made. And with that, I would turn it over to Jay Dema to maybe give a little bit of an overview of where he's gone in the last month. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. And so, as John noted, there were a number of questions that came up in last month's meeting, and for those that were, relevant and within the scope of the study, we addressed those questions and made changes to the report. And I'll just spend a couple minutes just going down what some of those couple key changes were. I think the first one was a comment that came up about the affordability, or the definition of affordability from the Metropolitan Council, because There's an important component here of the Metropolitan Council's role in trying to incentivize and promote affordable housing throughout the region. So we, dug a little deeper. We had a definition already in the report, but I think we went and found a more sort of robust definition that I think clearly kind of states what that was, and that ended up getting inserted on pages 5 and pages 50 through 52 on the in the report. There was also a question that came up about the number of bedrooms that might be in single-family rental homes, because that data wasn't actually included in the original report. And we worked with Hennepin County to get some more detailed information with respect to how many bedrooms are in the single-family units. So we, again, sort of summarized that information from the county and included that, again, in a revised table. Actually, it's a new table, Table 3A in the report, which would be found on page 18. So we were able to then now see just what, how many of those units have, for example, 2 and 3 bedroom units in them, which I think is somewhat relevant here because, as you know, what would be the apartment units in the city have a lot of 1-bedroom units. But then when we actually include in the analysis the single-family homes, we get a number of actually larger unit types of 2 and 3-bedroom units, and in some cases 4 and even 5+ bedroom units. So we can see that in the report, and that's on. Actually, I apologize. It's on page 18, Table 3A is that new table. There also was, I believe, a question about what constitutes a vacant or a healthy vacancy rate in the community, and we included some additional language in the report to kind of help explain that percentage. It's generally considered a 5% vacancy rate is typically a healthy rate, but we were able to kind of go into a little bit more detail on why, from a sort of an industry standpoint, why that's considered healthy. And part of it has to do with the ability for the property owners to have enough occupied units generating rent so that they can maintain cash flow, continue to invest in the properties, keep them up to date. But when the vacancy rate drops below that 5%, that benefits the property owner without any doubt. They don't have any vacant units in there. But at the same time, they have fully occupied units, which sometimes that might be indication that the property owner is in a position to raise rents, perhaps at a rate that's not commensurate with the wages and so forth of those folks that are living there. Also, with the fully occupied units, then that actually reduces the ability of the property owners when turning over those units to actually make those improvements and keep things kind of fixed up and so forth. So the industry kind of looks at it and says, 5% seems to be kind of that healthy rate. If it's above 5%, there's probably some excess supply out there. The property owners are struggling to reinvest. If it's below, then we have some pent-up demand and sometimes inability to reinvest. So we included some additional language on that on page 28 in the report, talking about some of those components and why a 5% is considered healthy. There also was a question talking about the breakdown of the mix of housing across affordability levels. And we in particular, in comparison to the peer communities that were identified in the report, and we put together a new table and inserted that on page 31, so that folks can kind of have a better understanding of the number of units at these different affordability levels in Richfield as well as peer communities. So we include that information in there. The one caveat that I want to note, and this is included in the narrative that we added with this table as well, that in order to get this data, we had to look solely at the U.S. Census. And when one does that, the rent information that we were pulling out, because we were looking at rent information not only in Richfield, but in all these peer communities, it's self-reported information, and it comes from 2010. It's not from 2012. So those were two aspects of that table that we wanted to caveat and make clear for those who are looking at this table and looking at those comparisons, that they understand that this is solely information coming from the U.S. Census, and it does have some limitations. So that's one thing we wanted to identify. And then really I think the final thing that was significant that came up that might have been considered part of the scope that we wanted to address, I believe was a question from Commissioner Quam relating to the comparison of units that are affordable and the actual incomes related to those units, and whether there indeed is a lack of supply or vice versa. And I think that the question there, I did some analysis, some deeper digging into this question, and I put together some information. I analyzed it, but I ended up becoming a little bit reticent to actually put it in the report for a few reasons. The first two I actually just noted about that one table we did add, and that applies to this as well, and that is we're looking at 2010 census data to get that household income picture, and then the rents that we want to compare that to, which looking at Richfield, we have more current 2012 rents that aren't necessarily self-reported like in the census, but they're actually off of survey information and quoted rents from the actual property owners and property managers. But there is that 2-year gap there, so that was one condition about the data. The other thing is that in the household income data for renters, the census does not break that out as to the type of unit that those folks are in, whether they're in an apartment building that's a larger apartment building or a smaller apartment building or a single-family home. So that data was really looked at including and inclusive of those single-family home units. On the rent side, the trick is comparing that up, is that there's really no good data source out there that tells us what the rents are that are in single-family homes or duplexes. So there was a way that we could try to estimate that information, but again, I think being somewhat concerned about the verifiability or the validity of that data, that led to some concern there. The other thing too, a third point on some of my concern about the data then was that the senior influence of seniors on this data set. And again, in the income data, we can see incomes for senior households as well as other age groups as well. But when looking at the rents of the actual rental properties, we don't know, other than an actual age-restricted property, we don't know how many seniors then are in the different types of buildings in our general occupancy units as well. So that created a little bit of kind of noise in the analysis, in part because one of the things we looked at was what is that 30% of one's income that they might spend on their housing. And for a family of 4, let's say with 2 young children, that standard's 30%. And generally in the affordable housing advocacy, folks kind of treat that across the board. But in my experience, seniors, they don't generally have as many expenses that younger families do relating to saving for retirement or saving for kids' college education or feeding and clothing those kids. So that I think that 30% threshold isn't as relevant for an older age group as it is for a younger age group. So again, that kind of confounded a little bit looking at and trying to compare households to those rents that are out there, particularly in the general occupancy units. So if there's a senior that's living in the general occupancy unit and they've got a rent or an income of a certain amount, and what their rent is, it's really hard to see, where that is in the data. And then also there was some concern on my part about the data not being able to really look efficiently at bedroom size. We have some tables in the report that look at rents by bedroom size, but when you start to, again, use these ways to compare against folks' household incomes, it gets to be a little bit of a murky challenge trying to tease out, what's a one bedroom versus a two versus a three, and what the household income is, and how many people are living in those households that are attached to that income. So it introduced enough questions in my mind as to whether that's something that really would be valid and accurate to have it in the report. But we did go through that process, and we put together some things, and again, I think if we wanted to list all those caveats to those tables, we could certainly ultimately include it in the report as well. But it'd be a long list of bulleted caveats on it. So I think with that summary, I think that was generally the key questions that we addressed in revising the report, and I'm certainly happy to answer any more questions.
Okay.
Madam Chair, of course, I always read these, and I always got questions about this. I'm reading on page 60, the Metropolitan Council Affordable Housing Requirements, and it appears if you have contacted the Met Council regarding Richfield's affordable housing requirements related to participation in the Livable Communities Act. But in general, I guess what I was looking at, not just the Livable Communities Act, what is the Met Council's affordability housing requirements? Not just livable communities, but in general, and for communities abroad. Are they looking at populations in the metropolitan area to have 20% affordable throughout their community, or 15, or what is it that we're trying to hit here? And so I guess my question was broader than what you had responded to. I appreciate that you did respond, because I did ask a question similar to this, but I'm not sure I got down to what I was looking at, and I wanted to know across there. This actually brought up another question too, because if we negotiate the life cycle goals with the Met Council, the city staff does, then that brings me to the question of, first of all, how do we do that, and with what background are we able to do that intelligently when we didn't have a lot of this information? So I have two questions, and I'm not sure we can answer all of them. But
I'll try to answer the first one, and with respect to, from my conversations with them and then doing the research that they have on their affordable housing online, I don't think that my council actually has a requirement other than what they have as part of their LCA program.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's interesting. Then maybe staff could just answer.
Yeah, I would just add the Met Council's affordability requirements have the carrot and the stick. Mm-hmm. And the carrot is the Livable Communities grant funding. And the more you comply with their affordable housing guidelines, the higher you score when you're applying for grants. So that's the incentive side of it. The regulatory side of it only comes along once every 10 years. And that's when you're doing your comprehensive plan. And typically, a year or two before comprehensive plans are due, that's when the Met Council writes its housing policy goals. And for Richfield, those goals were, X number of total units over the next 20 years, and of those, X number of affordable units. And on that regulatory side, once you've written your comprehensive plan and the Met Council has signed off on it, you've met that requirement. And so in the case of Richfield, until one of two things happens, we're fine. Either we have wholesale changes to our comprehensive plan that the Met Council staff feels like takes us out of compliance with that, which I don't foresee happening. Or secondly, the next time comprehensive plans are due again, which will be 2018, So in 2015 or 16, they'll come up with new housing goals. So really, those are the next times we would have to address it from a regulatory standpoint.
And will we use some of this information then to
Oh,
try
absolutely.
to talk about our scope of what we're trying to do already? Okay. It's good to know how
But,
that actually
yeah, and
happens.
the other thing you have to consider is when the Met Council put out their numbers in 2005 for housing, that was based on data. All of our data we're operating off of is always old.
Yeah.
And so the Met Council, when they put that information out in 2005, they were working off of probably 2003 data about construction starts and those kinds of things when there was a housing boom going on. So they were operating under the assumption that that housing boom was going to continue. That's how they get the total number of housing units that they think we should have. And then from that, they determine how many of those need to be affordable. I don't think anybody, given today's housing market, thinks that those numbers are attainable.
So do they do anything to anybody who doesn't obtain their goals?
Not once you've turned in your comprehensive plan and met it through that.
Okay, I'm going to see if anyone on this end has questions, and then I'll go the other way. Mr. Klum?
I just want to thank you for the updates. I'm not sure I followed your final explanation. But I just wanted to actually note just a couple things that I think are very significant that came out of the update. On table 9A, there's an indication that almost 70% of our rental stock is affordable to people with 50% or less of the area median income, which is the highest percentage of any of our peer communities. So we have more affordable housing, according to the way I read it, than any of the peer communities, and an extraordinarily high percentage of affordable housing if you think about a balanced community with 70%. Does that seem like a fair reading of it?
Yes, and I think in the narrative of the report, I think I commented that largely due to the fact that there's a lot of smaller unit types, which generally are, less expensive than larger unit types, and that's driving that. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the other point that I thought was very valuable was that it brought, your study of the single-family homes brought out the fact that we have almost 500 more units that are 2+ or more bedrooms, which is a 33% increase over what the original report said. So while it may be that we need 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, it could be that what we really need is just upgrading what we've got rather than adding to what we've got. It certainly isn't as clear cut, is it, about the 2- and 3-bedroom and so on as it was before.
Oh, sure. I would, but at the same time, I would also add to that there's two important things to understand about the single-family market, perhaps three. One is that we saw a rapid rise in the number of rental single-family homes that we know was a result of the foreclosure, crisis. And so there's an opportunity that may retreat in the number of those units when the market improves. All of those owners may want to, sell off to owner-occupied folks as well and turn those back in the market. The second thing is that there is generally, I think, more burden of maintenance on a renter of a single-family home than it is in an apartment building. And so there is a segment of the market that may shy away from the idea of living in a single-family home because more than likely you're going to be negotiated with your rent to do the maintenance and the upkeep on the home. And so that there's certain folks, particularly those that, are maybe headed by a single, person household, may have young children, and would look at that and go that may be too much of a burden for me. So that's a second thing. And then the other thing is then there's the absentee landlord component of a single-family home versus, a bigger apartment building where you've got on-site property management and can kind of help control for the maintenance and the upkeep and the behavior of the tenants. So those are just three things I just want to comment on that may be important to keep in mind.
Thanks. Just a quick question about this. what you just said about the 2 bedrooms, I notice all of the vacancy rates are very low, but the highest of them is the 2 bedrooms, which seems to argue against the fact that as the people are clamoring for the 2 bedroom and the multi-units.
Are you referring to Table 8, that's on page
Yes.
28? Yeah, I mean, your point is valid, that that's the highest vacancy rate of the unit types in the metro area? Is that what you're thinking of in particular?
In Richfield,
3.4.
Okay. Now, at the same time, it's a 3.4% vacancy rate.
right.
So I would
It's
say
just
that
by comparison to the other units.
for comparison, sake, and at that low a vacancy rate, that could just be a function of, you might have one property owner that's actually being diligent and saying, I'm going to keep a couple units off the market for a couple months to make repairs and fix things, and that could actually, with this small a number, might influence that. So I would caution taking, too strong a conclusion on that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on that end? No? Okay. Doris?
Again, thank you very much for tremendous work done here.
Thank you.
There's a few, I have comments as much as questions on some of these things here, and I hope we have enough time. First of all, on page 5, when you're talking about senior housing, having gone through, participated in more than 1 or 2 planning sessions with the community, comprehensive plan, it's very clear that the community is really opposed to large-scale senior housing developments, that we'd like, just as we'd like to see a variety of housing choices for income levels within our housing. We also like to see age variation. And talking about this kind of thing just got me a little bit nervous, because it seemed to me talking about favoring segregated senior housing, and I think that the city is really trying to avoid that kind of thing. We do understand the special services that a lot of seniors need, but for those who don't need it, we want to make sure that there is housing available, rental housing available for them. Mm-hmm. Another thing, and I appreciate the difficulty of this. It was my request at our last meeting that you try to find out how many condo and co-op units are being rented, and you stated that it just was virtually impossible to be able to do that. We don't have that many in Richfield, condos and co-ops. And just coming to me, you could have found out how many are in Woodlake Village. Going to the manager of City Bella or Gramercy, 3 phone calls, you could have found that information out. So a little bit disappointed in that one, because I know that there is a appreciable number of rentals going on in that particular kind of housing.
Doris, just to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity, do you have questions specifically that you still want to answer?
Let me see here. I've got stars and 8s, everything like that. No, I think that mine are more comments than questions.
Okay. We'll come back to you.
Okay.
And we'll go on. Did you have anything, Tom, you wanted to bring up?
Didn't have any questions, but I really thank you. That was really a deep report. If you start diving into this, you learn a lot of things about our city and about what's happening around us, and I appreciate how in-depth it was.
Thank you.
Okay. And the Planning Commission, any questions down there? Maureen?
I was out of town, so unfortunately there was no opportunity to read this whole thing. But I noticed in the executive summary, you're talking about the fact that there's more rental stock accommodating more and more households with children, but we really only have one-bedroom units. Are you saying that families are doubling up in a one-bedroom? So that there's, multiple kids in a one-bedroom apartment?
Oh, yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the data would indicate that. Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, Doris, I'll let you continue if you had any other comments then.
It's sort of on the order of what Maureen was just saying. As I was looking at the maps of rental units identified throughout Richfield, I know in my neighborhood on the west side and surrounding Richfield Lake, let's put it that way, in the north central part of the city, I didn't see any of the rental houses that I know are rental houses on my street and a couple on the north side of the lake that I know are rentals. I know the landlords, or it's very clear that these are rentals. And it's not so much for you as for the city. How do we get these people to register as being rental properties? Because 2 out of the 3 or 4 that I'm talking about have way over capacity. Talking about, people doubling and tripling up in these homes. The number of people living in them is phenomenal. Way over what I would call a safe level for the size of these homes. And so once again, they're not included in the survey, they're not on the map, and what's worse, these are dangerous living situations. They're not paying the taxes they should be paying, and I'd just like to bring that to the attention of the staff. I don't know how we solve it.
Yep.
Mr. Stark?
Madam Chair and Commissioners and Council members, for our rental licensing, the way that we find out a house or any unit is a rental, there are 2 primary sources. One is we're fortunate enough to have our own water utility. And so if the water bill is being paid by a different name than the house is in, that's usually a clue. The other, so the billing is one of the primary ways. The other primary way is hearing from neighbors. And so if you believe that there's a house or a unit next to you that is a rental, always feel free, and this is for anybody watching on TV as well, to call city staff and let us know. We have, I don't remember the number of rental registrations we have offhand. It's over 500. So I do believe we do a good job of tracking down the rental registrations, but there are always going to be some that fall through the cracks. There are also some units that neighbors are positive. We hear from neighbors on both sides of them more positive that this is a rental situation. We go over there, we do some investigating, and it turns out to not be the case, or else it's impossible to prove that it's a rental. So sometimes what you think is a rental may not always be.
Well, when you do go over and welcome the people to the neighborhood and ask them if they're buying the house and if they're renting it, and they tell you it's rented and it's not on the map.
Right, but if they're renting from their parent, or if they're renting from, there are some situations in which it may be a rental house but not on rental registration. So, but certainly let us know what those addresses are.
Just a comment. I don't know what Richfield's ordinance is in respect to it, but I know in Minneapolis, if you're a landlord and you want to evict a tenant, you cannot do it if you don't have a rental license in place. That's one of the things that the tenants know, and so they'll demand to see the rental license, and if the owner doesn't have it, too bad, you can't evict them, even if they don't pay the rent. So something we might want to think about.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and we check Craigslist is another thing we do for, people advertising for rentals in Richfield. And we regularly go through Craigslist and match that up to our rental registration charts. And if it's not on there, they get a response.
Okay. Anyone else with any comments? I will make one. I guess what I really appreciated about the report was the gaps analysis that was done on page 4, which is the summary. And it's telling us as policymakers and staff and the residents, these are the things where we have gaps in what we need, in the type of housing that we have. And one of the HRA's long-standing goals is to have a whole continuum of housing available for different incomes, different size families, and different types of needs that residents might have. And obviously, number 1 is 2- and 3-bedroom rental units. That's listed as a clear gap, and we know that. Anyone who's ever been through any of our apartments knows the bulk of them are all 1-bedroom. The next one is newer properties with modern amenities and features. And I've heard from a number of seniors and friends who have said, well, when are you going to build some more townhomes? We're waiting. We're tired of keeping track of our yard, and we want to get out, but we don't want to leave the city. When are you going to do it? And the answer is, that's a good question. We don't have the answer. So that's something that's one of the listed here is newer properties with amenities and features. And that's one of the things, some of the new housing that's being built that I think is substantial improvement is it's got the amenities that people are looking for. It's got in-unit washers and dryers. Some of them now have granite countertops, dishwashers. Those are features that most of Richfield's rental housing does not have. And those are features that people that look for something new and updated are wanting. And so those are things that I think it's important that we pay attention to. And then obviously they also list subsidized units appropriate for families, and we've just discussed the fact that we have the bulk of one families that have children crowded into the 1 bedrooms. And then finally it does list senior housing of all types. And we do have a good supply of senior housing, but most of it is a number of years old, and we don't have necessarily all of the affordable senior housing that we need. So I really appreciate your study, and we thank you for going back and updating the questions that we asked that you do. And there are some other things at the bottom of the comments that were made that did not get addressed, mostly because we didn't hire you to do it and we didn't pay you to do it. So we appreciate that. Mr. Stark?
I just want to take 1 second to talk about next steps. A few of the next things we're going to do. One is work on collecting better data. Our rental licensing forms, we're going to look at those and make sure we're asking all the questions we need to ask about unit size and bedroom count in each unit, those kinds of things. So we're going to go through all of the data we collect. Unfortunately, I don't know if people have caught this, but the United States legislature it sounds like has done away with the American Community Survey that's part of the census, what is formerly called the long form.
Yes.
And that was, for people in community development, that was a very good source of information for us to work off of, and that's being eliminated. So we'll have to work on finding ways of digging into data if that's gone. The next piece we want to do is take the gap analysis that Jay did and get that into a form that we can get consensus on with the council, HRA, the Planning Commission, that kind of a problem definition. These are the problems the way we see it from that gap analysis, and then prioritize those. From that, then we want to identify solutions for those problems. And the first thing we'll do is look at other communities and see how other communities are dealing with some of those kinds of problems. To the extent that we can't find other communities doing them, we will, we'll try to come up with our own ideas. And then finally, once we've identified some of these solutions, we'll come back to you and talk to you about funding sources and how we can actually implement those.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. John, my hopes are actually a little bit broader than that. We were looking at this rental as just a part of the policy that we're going to make on housing. So this is a great start of where we need to be on that. But we did a study not long ago with all the different housing types as well, the owner-occupied housing, and Councilmember Sandal and Chair Sandal has also talked about move-up housing and those kinds of things. I'd kind of like to look at a broad swath, so we look at a vision for the whole thing, not just this piece of it and that piece of it and this piece of it. Let's put it together and talk about a broad vision, and then let's come back through this and start looking about how we get there, because I don't want to just segregate one thing out.
Sure, and that makes complete sense, and I may not have stated it that way, but the idea is you've got several of these things going on separate tracks, but they won't be happening in isolation of one another. And I know in this study, and some of it is the context of the times, we've spent a lot of time talking about affordable rental housing. That wasn't the focus of this study. The focus of the study was rental housing. And so to the extent that we need to talk about move-up rental housing and other things, I don't want to. I don't want people in the audience or people watching TV thinking that from this study comes a focus on affordable rental housing. That's certainly going to be a piece of the puzzle, but that's not the big picture.
No, this is a long-term plan of what we want to do in housing in general, not just rental either.
Yes.
Owner-occupied as well.
Okay. Anything else on this topic? Okay. Well, this is a study session that started at 6, and our regular council HRA meeting does not start again until 7, so we will adjourn at this point and meet back at 7 o'clock. Thank you.